Esperanza Moreno and I had been friends for ages, and I thought her natural sunshine would never waver. Certainly not, as it turned out, because of me. As the train pulled into Edinburgh Waverley Station, it was surreal stepping out into Princes Street and taking in a panoramic view of the time worn, dusty brown buildings that made up the city centre. The year was 2012, and I hadn't visited in almost 2 decades. Looking around, it seemed to have been locked in a time capsule, unchanged in any discernible way. Then my head tilted up towards the downcast sky, and I was happy for the new set of braids on my scalp to offset any of the region's typical rainfall, the bane of natural afro hair. There was hardly time to get my bearings when my jeans pocket started vibrating. Reaching for my phone, I saw Esperanza's name on the display, which, after answering, was soon followed by her familiar Spanish, Hola. After following her directions around the side of the station, a car horn sounded behind me. I turned round, and rather than the 2D photos she'd sent me over the years, I was seeing the real 3D Esperanza for the first time in almost a decade, igniting a spontaneous run forward. She got out of the car to reciprocate my big squeezy hug before we stepped back smiling, now in our 30s, but looking no different from our uni days in Brighton, save a sparse sprinkling of grey hairs each. From Waverley Station, we drove off through Edinburgh, surveying the urban sprawl as I remembered some of the photos Esperanza had sent of family trips with her Angolan husband, Joa Quilombo, and their two kids, Zinga and Laito, around the city's historical landmarks. This included the Old Town, containing the Royal Mile leading up to Edinburgh Castle. I'd always felt its massive, weathered structure embodied the darkness envisioned in Macbeth and could easily imagine each aspect of Shakespeare's sinister play taking place there. Equally enthralling was the intriguing ancientness of Blackness Castle, built in the shape of a ship, as well as the striking modernity of the Scottish Parliament building with its quirky Art Nouveau design, curved and angular at the same time. But all that paled to the quirky poses that the Moreno Colombo kids and parents alike struck in front of the many sites with arms and legs out in every directions and faces animated to the max, which always had me chuckling. My previous visits to Edinburgh had never seen me venture far from the city centre. It was therefore interesting to see that this new area called Morningside had the same dark, dusty brown buildings of Princes Street. In fact, Esperanza pulled up right in front of one and exclaimed, "We're home." Grabbing my travel bag, I said, "So this is your close," remembering the Scottish slang term for a block of flats. After climbing the stairs, my momentary wheezing was soon drowned out by squealing as Zinga and Lito came running to the door to greet their mother before taking a good look at her visitor. I gave them my Colombian souvenirs from my most recent assignment abroad in South America, and their big toothy grins signaled I definitely scored points there. Once I dumped my luggage, we went to the kitchen, where we found Joa sitting at the dining table. As ever, he had his trademark pursed smile, same as I remembered him, a poised but still warm contrast to Esperanza's standard wide beamer. As we hugged, a double wave of nostalgia engulfed me, seeing the people from my university days in England within the settings of my school days in Scotland. I soon understood the kitchen was the epicenter of the home, as there was a lot of commotion, with everyone coming in and out, bringing in books, toys, TV guides, and more. Esperanza wanted to start cooking lunch, and the kids were excited to help. But she then realized she'd forgotten to pick up some salad items for the meal that day. So we headed back downstairs into the car with the kids in tow. Upon arriving at the local supermarket, we saw an interesting looking pack of green leaves with red stems called chard. None of us had tried it before, so fitting our norm of trying something new, we threw a bunch into our trolley. Esperanza then began sounding off various other things they needed around the house. What happened next was a very well rehearsed set of army maneuvers, with the kids as mini lieutenants and their mother, the general, giving them instructions of things to bring back to her. With each call out of baked beans, morning rolls, etc., Zinga and Lito scurried out of sight to fetch their targets before reappearing a few minutes later and relinquishing them to the trolley. This family was clearly a fine-tuned, well-oiled machine, and I was loving every minute of seeing their familiar bond in action. I said as much to Esperanza. Life here must be so much fun. Though my broad smile was conversely met with her furrowed brow, as she said, Abby, this place isn't all fun. Her face became as downcast as the skies, the expression and coloration contrasting with her normally rosy cheeks. The kids were still on their current escapade, and I was intrigued by her statement. I remembered the exasperation in her voice when I'd called from Colombia a few days prior, and thinking this might be linked to it, I asked her to go on. She told me the joy of moving to Morningside had started to unravel rather quickly. Recounting their very first month in Edinburgh, she said the kids had already begun noticing the lack of friendliness towards them from the surrounding community, and it soon became obvious it was because of their skin color. At first, the sentiment was only subtly displayed, with some initial signs during a trip to that same local supermarket, and some people not returning the children's smile, avoiding eye contact, or turning their back towards them. Then one day, as Esperanza shopped amongst the various aisles, Zinga unusually came back without her target item. She told her mother she'd seen Robin, a schoolmate who was also out shopping with her mum. Zinga went over to say hi, but it seemed Robin's mum didn't want Zinga to be near her daughter, turning her in the other direction and walking off. Thinking that was odd, but no big thing, Esperanza continued with the shopping. Though a few minutes later, Lito unexpectedly returned to say he had also seen a girl in his class shopping with her grandmother. Being his outgoing self, Lito too had gone up to say hi. But his approach prompted the girl's grandmother to shout, Get off! This senior citizen's abrasive behavior perplexed the very friendly 5-year-old and took Esperanza aback. Still, the Moreno Columbus shrugged them off, deciding not to dwell on odd behavior and concluded their shopping trip relatively unfazed. Though that was to change when more wanton hostility beyond the supermarket was soon noticeable at school itself. One day, Lito joined in an after-school spinning game in the playground, which involved all the kids twirling around until so dizzy they fell all over each other. But when one girl fell down beside Lito, Esperanza noted the other parents' unsmiling faces glaring at him with impatience. It had been quite unsettling to see the hostile energy specifically directed towards her child, who was, after all, just doing the same thing as his classmates. Around the same time, Esperanza began noticing Zinga was coming home unhappy. Their family routine was always to eat together, discussing the day's events around the dining table, at which the normally sunny, engaging little girl was unusually subdued. Afterwards, Esperanza would ask her what was the matter, but received no definitive answers. She therefore sent emails to the school several times inquiring what was happening, but never got a single reply. Exasperated by the wall of silence, she again asked Zinga what was wrong. Her persistence finally paid off when her daughter revealed she was being harassed with hostility beyond that which had been directed at Lito after that after school spinning game. The other pupils' reaction to their new schoolmates wasn't one of curiosity about their Angolan Spanish background. Instead, they showed the same hostility that their parents and guardians had displayed towards the mixed race siblings. Though the brunt of the abuse soon focused on Zinga, who had girls and boys alike coming up to her every day shouting, "You are so ugly! Your afro is so ugly! You look like bullshit!" Racism. Racism. Such a simple 6-letter, 3-syllable word. Yet time had exposed many levels of definition for this particular prejudice. The first was quite self explanatory. Racism is the belief that innate physical variations across different human races determine cultural or individual ability, which then assign either superior or inferior status to certain races over others. As the supermarket's ceiling vents emitted warm air currents descending over my hair, my eyes, my nose, my lips, and my skin, I thought how odd it was for the color, texture, or shape of these attributes to be problematic for such people. Then there was the broader definition of racism as a policy or social system inherently characterized by racial discrimination, which, unlike the air currents rolling off my back, had breaking the backs of so many life prospects across the world. Why? Because the ultimate essence of racism is infused with the feeling of hatred or aversion towards one or many racial groups, as Zinga had unfairly experienced in the school playground that day. With that thought, I felt my skin crawl, as if that concept was a lingering impurity that the heated gusts from the ceiling vents could not blow away. Such attacking words shook this little girl deeply, resulting in the change Esperanza had seen in her daughter at the dining table and beyond. Now they knew about the name calling. Esperanza and Joa reported it to Mrs. Doris Jefferson, the school's acting head teacher. She had been temporarily put in charge a month after the Moreno Colombo kids were enrolled. But from the very beginning, this woman's attitude towards the racist bullying struck these concerned parents as totally blasé. On the first occasion they met with Doris Jefferson, she had taken notes and reassuringly said that she would speak to the involved parties. But it soon became clear that she didn't follow up with student interviews or anything to that effect, leaving the matter unresolved and Esperanza and Joa feeling angsty. Later, during a parents' meeting, they again spoke to Doris Jefferson, inquiring how she was handling the behavior towards their daughter. She gave them a vague answer, which it seemed was intended to placate them, because again, they saw no action taken against the bullies in the wake of that second conversation. Back in the supermarket, Esperanza continued her story, saying how the Edinburgh head teacher's attitude was in stark contrast to the head teacher at Zinga's previous school in Newcastle. A similar racist incident had occurred when the Moreno Colombo kids first enrolled there, and two white kids approached the 3-year-old Zinga at that time in the toilet and jeered, "What color is your tongue? What color is your wee? Is that black as well?" Before laughing in her face. Zinga was left in tears and was still quite distraught when later recounting the incident to her mother. At such a young age, this little girl had no concept of race and couldn't work out why they were saying such horrible things. Where was their viciousness coming from, considering it was completely without provocation on her part? At that time, Esperanza saw something else shift in her daughter's eyes, which was this mother's understanding to be the change from innocence. On that occasion, the parents also immediately reported the incident to the school, and the Newcastle head teacher met with the two bullies. She got them to admit to their actions, then sent a letter to both girls' parents as well as the local board of education, stating that if they conducted themselves that way towards Zinger again, they would be expelled. Such a swift and professional response from the school leadership was nowhere to be seen at the Edinburgh School, which left Esperanza reeling. She and Joa had chosen that school thinking it would be in keeping with their Christian tradition. But below the surface, it began to appear very different from the moral, compassionate, and indeed professional haven they'd expected. Dear Lord. Hearing all of this in the supermarket aisle with our chads and other groceries totally threw me for a loop. But by that time, our trolley was full, and Zinga and Lito were permanently at our side. So Esperanza forcibly lifted a downcast expression from her face to be sunny for the kids, as did I. We headed over to the checkout tills, paid for our food, and drove back home. I'd certainly been looking forward to the meal, but Esperanza's story of the kids' experiences had put a lump in my throat, making me wonder if I'll be able to swallow anything at all. Back at the close, we carried the shopping bags up the stairs, into the flat, and straight to the kitchen, where the kids started putting away the groceries as efficiently as they had collected them at the supermarket. Esperanza then whipped up a lovely meal, prepared the chard salads to accompany our lunch, and we all sat down to indulge. We chatted away about Colombia and my latest travels, which the kids were fascinated by, listing off amazing random locales across the world as far as their young imaginations could stretch, and their eyes widening to hear that I'd indeed been to all of their guesses. Dubai? Yes. Thailand? Yes. Shanghai? Yes. South Korea? Yes. Whoa! But what I really wanted was to hear more stories from this locale, Edinburgh Morningside, and what else had happened to the kids within their school community. I was to get my chance after the meal when Joa headed out to run a few errands, and the kids went off to watch some telly. As Esperanza and I cleared the table and washed the dishes, she shared more of what had happened at the school. So many times the kids came home upset, Esperanza said, as we sat together at the table once the dishes were done. The constant, the constant animosity coming Zingle and Leiter's way at school continued to affect their confidence, and the declining self-esteem was further compounded by emotional blockages in Zinga. This in turn affected not only her academic learning, but her perceived life prospects. Like so many little girls, she loved ballet dancing, captured by the flowing tippy-toe movements and elegance. During one TV performance, she said she wanted to possibly become a ballerina, but quickly followed this with, but brown people can't be ballet dancers. The anguish in Esperanza's voice was clear as she said, heading my 8-year-old daughter, already believing her ethnicity was a barrier to reaching her dreams, was the most unfair disruption of the love and nurturing that I wanted to envelop my children in. to build their inner strength. All I could do was nod in agreement to this mother's distressed words about the consequence of the negativity being impressed upon her child. But there was still worse to come. With time, Zinga started transferring the racism outside her home into her family circle. One day, she came into the living room, sat down next to Esperanza, looked her in the eye, and calmly asked, Mummy, would you love me more if I were white? And I'll end the story there for now. Thank you for listening to part one of the narrative.